What I was saying yesterday was that I think the way to view this epistle is not so much as just an argument that there is a world to come, but rather that the Rambam is really using this both to say that he does believe in the world to come, but also to reiterate and to show, maybe in a slightly more hidden way, his real belief, which is that reward and punishment is in the world to come, in the soul world, and that that even though he does believe in the resurrection of the dead in a physical way, or he says he does, that he's minimizing the significance that that has for many reasons that we mentioned, because he doesn't think the physical is that important, and he thinks that those who believe that the ultimate reward and punishment for eternity is physical is crazy. Also because of his belief in the eternality of the intellect, and that's connected to the soul. And also, I think another philosophical issue, which is miracles, that the Rambam doesn't want to believe that miracles are just willy-nilly, but that miracles are limited, that they're part of the physical structure of the laws of nature, and therefore things that violate the laws of nature can't be permanent. They need to be very temporary, or else your belief in miracles goes away. Because for the Rambam, miracles there can be miracles, but we live in a world that's guided by laws of nature. And once miracles take over everything, there's no more laws of nature. So he wants to, I think, minimize. So I think the function of this paper is to reiterate that he's a believer, and because he was probably getting flack, but it's also, I think, at the same time, it actually minimizes the role that people might believe the resurrection of the dead plays. And he says, this is all because of the false notion in the minds of people who do not believe there's a firm existence except for the physical body. And he thinks that that's totally wrong. He says, concerning those who are called wise, those who are truly and figuratively so, it is clear to them that anything which is separated from a substance has firmer existence than a substance itself. In other words, substance in the world comes and goes. So you need something, for something to be permanent, for there to be real reward and punishment, you need something which is spiritual. For us, it's obvious, but it wasn't in the world that the Rambam's in. And then the intellect. Similarly, everything that is created separate, that is to say the angels and the human intellect, is extremely firm in its existence, right? He lumps together angels, soul, and human intellect, because human intellect is separate from the body for the Rambam. It exists longer than any body. For this reason, we believe that angels are not corporeal, and that people in the world to come have separate souls, that is to say, intellect. That's a very central thing for the Rambam. Furthermore, intellectual proofs which confirm that angels and people in the world to come are devoid of corporality, and that the references which speak of corporality are simply metaphors. Even these proofs cannot be understood by those who believe that the above have corporality. In other words, he says, what do you do with, the idea of angels, eating with Abraham or other things? So he would say anything that depicts angels or the world to come in a physical way is metaphor. When this composition of ours, this is about the student that caused trouble in Damascus. He talks about why he's writing this, and part of it is because of this Rabbi Shmuel who accused him, and part of it also is there was a student of his in Damascus who said that there is no belief necessary in the resurrection of the dead, and he said he learned it from the Rambam's work. Since the Rambam is coming, I guess that word got around about that, and the Rambam's come to say, no, I do believe in the resurrection of the dead. We answered, he says here, the resurrection of the dead is a cardinal principle of the Torah, the return of the soul to the body, which should not be explained allegorically. That the life in the world to come after resurrection of the dead is as we stated it in chapter Chelek, and we thought this would be sufficient. In other words, so what does he mean here? And he says that people in Yemen accused him of not believing in the resurrection of the dead. They cite evidence concerning what we stated about people in the world to come, that he didn't talk about the resurrection of the dead, only the world to come. When they were reminded of the clear and lucid words of the sages about the resurrection of the dead, they said those are allegory. And the questioner told us this opinion, that people were not believing in the resurrection of the dead, and wanted to know a reply from us. So we answered their request and explained resurrection of the dead is a cardinal principle. And the return of the soul to the body is not an allegory, it's real. And that life in the world to come after the resurrection of the dead is as we stated in chapter Chelek, right? So here he's setting out a timeline. He says, yes, we believe in the resurrection of the dead, but that's not the end point. Don't think that's the reward. The reward is still in the world to come, in the world of souls. So what he's saying is, and this makes resurrection of the dead make a lot less sense, but what it sounds like he's saying is a person dies to go to the world to come, then they're resurrected, they live in their body for how long, I don't know, then they die, and then they go back to the world to come. So like he's got both now. He's got it both ways, but of course it makes the resurrection of the dead make a lot less sense. Who needs that if it's just, for a moment, or what's its purpose? When you empty the resurrection of the dead of its eternal significance, then who needs it really? What's its function? That's what's hard to understand. It talks about this Rabbi Shmuel Halevi, who criticized him that we had seen before. Then he says, the philosophers, the most amazing thing of all we noticed in the treatise of Rabbi Shmuel Halevi, Rabbi Shmuel Halevi declares that scholarly philosophers do not say it is impossible for the soul to return to the body after it has been separated, but it's theoretically possible. In other words, Rambam believes that according to philosophy, the soul cannot return to the body because the body has already decomposed, and he does not seem to believe in the kind of miracle that it will come back together. Although he says he does, but he thinks philosophers do not. And remember, he said in the Perek Chelek, he made the point, he said the body, falls apart. This treatise proves those who advised him are scholarly philosophers. There's no knowledge. See, I guess he's arguing here that maybe philosophers would say it is possible for the resurrection of the dead. Okay. He doesn't explain how. He talks about the intellect and the soul being the same. He observed another amazing thing, and that is that the intellect is not at all mentioned by Rabbi Shmuel Halevi. And the Rambam doesn't think you can talk about these kinds of things without talking about the intellect. Then he says, and I say the resurrection of the dead, which is widely known and accepted among our people, and which is acknowledged by all branches of our nation, which is often cited in prayers and the legends of our sages, in the Talmud, that the soul will return to the body after its separation. This is a premise about which there is no disagreement among the nation. It requires no interpretation. It's not permissible for any religious Jew to support a man who believes the opposite. Okay, so he keeps going back and forth. He says very clearly he believes in the resurrection of death. I'll presently explain this treatise why these scriptural passages are not interpreted allegorically, right? Because you could ask the Rambam, why not just say that, whenever the resurrection of death is talked about, it's an allegory. It's not, don't take it literally, but he says you have to. It says, verily, that which is asserted about us, that we said that the scriptural passages about the resurrection that are allegorical, that's what he was accused of, is a widespread falsehood and a revolting statement. Our writings are already widely disseminated. Let the reader show us where we even said such a thing. He did not say it's allegory. On the other hand, we know that he did minimize it. Perhaps we were misunderstood about Ezekiel. we've already explained that the existence of the entire body is for a single goal, that is to receive nutrition for the maintenance of the body, for the bearing of children, in order to maintain the human race. When that goal is removed because there's no longer a need, therefore, that is to say in the world to come, and this has already been explained, that there's no eating and drinking. It is clear the body will not exist, right? So here, what happened? He was just talking about the resurrection of the dead and how it's a physical thing. And now he's back on the world to come. And he says, of course, everybody would agree that you don't need a body in the world to come. The Lord bless, he would not create anything except for a reason. And therefore, right, because the world to come is a place without bodies, we know that you can't have, it's a funny logic. He says the world to come is a place drinking of sexual intercourse. So those who want to say that there's a physical body in the future that exists forever, either that the resurrection of the dead is permanent, or that you have a physical body in the Garden of Eden, or you have a physical body in the world to come, says that can't be true because of this one statement that sages make, that there's no physical eating and drinking. So why would you have a body? And he says philosophically, it doesn't make sense for God to give us a body that we're not going to use. So that's his proof that in the world to come, there is no physicality. A little bit circular. God forbid that his perfect actions be compared to the actions of idolaters. They have eyes and do not see, they have ears and do not hear, right? We say that in Tehillim. Pelahem below Yidaberu and Ayahem below Yeru. So, just like that's ridiculous that idols have eyes and they can't see, so too, we are not going to have eyes if we can't see in the world to come. And how do we know we're not going to be able to see in the world to come? This one statement of the sages, that there's no eating and drinking. The reason for all this, as we've explained, the multitude of people do not conceive existence unless, right? Why is it such an issue? Because people are just so fixated on the physical. And we're just working hard to get people away from the idea of the physical, right? So the Rambam's sort of stuck, like he's working very hard philosophically to convince everybody, who's sort of has these very physical, very materialistic beliefs, because that's all they can understand. But he also has to admit, he's being forced to admit that there's a resurrection of the dead. So it's not great for the Rambam. He's trying to, you can see how he's trying to carve a path where he says both. There is physical resurrection of the dead, but don't think that that's a permanent state. Don't think that that's the real reward. Don't think that there's physicality in the world to come. Physicality is not very important for the Rambam. In fact, it is very, it's intellect and spirituality, which is important for the Rambam. And again, we use the word spirituality. I don't know if the Rambam meant the same thing by that. The Rambam has a whole structure, medieval Aristotelian structure for what spirituality is, right? It's a tuning into the intellects, which are the stars and other things, and the active intellect, which is the lowest one, and those are connected. It's how you connect to God. And it's how you get prophecy. He talks about this in the Moreh Nevuchim, the guys that perplexed. After all the explanations throughout our writings, it is not possible a person should be misled and state that we believe that all scriptural references to resurrection of the dead are allegories. Some of them are understood literally, as we've mentioned, right? He keeps saying, of course, when you read my books, you'll see that, the resurrection of the dead is taken seriously. Since we find that the words of the prophets cannot bear any meaning but a literal one, and that it states the soul will return to the body, the definiteness of this prophetic narrative becomes established. In other words, he's saying, you got to believe it because the prophets say it. Truth of this narrative is not increased. If one were to posit that every time the word resurrection occurs in Scripture, it means a return of the soul to the body, or would the truth of this narrative be dismissed if one assumed that these were all allegory? Not sure what he means by that. The findings of modern sages Israel mentioned it in numerous books about the resurrection of the dead. You're stuck with it. This is the accepted context of the resurrection of the body. wherever it is mentioned by scholar and author, right? He says it's been accepted among the Jewish people. He does not have a good argument. He doesn't have any philosophical argument so far for the physical resurrection of the dead. He just keeps minimizing its length of time and its importance, and says, you can't take it as allegory in the words of the prophets and the sages, and that's just how it is. He doesn't have a physical argument for why one would say you want to have the resurrection of the dead. In fact, I don't think he does want that. I think he thinks that's a problem. I think he thinks it's a philosophical problem, the resurrection of the dead. Some people have raised doubts about our words at the end of our composition, meaning at the end of the Mishnah Torah, where we state, do not think that the King Messiah will perform signs and wonders or bring anything new. It's funny, I asked this question like 20 years ago when I was learning the end of the Mishnah Torah. I was like, where's the resurrection of the dead? Like, what about all his beliefs? Everybody tells you the Rambam has 13 beliefs, and it's not at all in his story about the Mashiach. So he says people are critical of us for that. We cited evidence for this assertion in our explanation. In other words, evidence that there'll be nothing new, that the time of the Messiah is not a miraculous time. Some people with weak intellects think this assertion represents a denial of the resurrection of the dead. Sure seems like it does. And that the resurrection of the dead is, and that it contradicts what we said in the Mishnah, that the resurrection of the dead is a cardinal principle. Okay, he did say that. This matter is all very clear. There's no doubt about it. That which we asserted, that the Messiah will not be required to perform a miracle, such as the resurrection of the dead or splitting the sea, since the prophecies have been verified, it does not follow from this treatise that the Almighty, at the time of his choice, will not resurrect those he wishes to resurrect, whether during the year of the Messiah, or before him, or after his death. Okay, so what he's saying is, when I said in the Mishnah Torah that the Mashiach won't do any miracles, nothing will be supernatural, what he's saying now is I meant the Messiah won't. But maybe God will. In the final analysis, nothing in our words that could raise doubts about resurrection in the minds of discerning people. Only people. What's its arguments? When we asserted the Messiah will not be required to perform a miracle, means the miracle will not be asked of him, since the prophecy has been verified and foretold this event. But maybe God will do it, either before or after the Messiah. This is very weak. That's the question that you ask when you come to the end of the Mishnah Torah and you say, he says, Ein bein olam hazeh l'mos Mashiach hashib malchus bavad, quoting the Gemara. There's no difference in our time of the Messiah, except that the Jews will have sovereignty in the land. There's nothing miraculous going to happen. And people say, what do you mean nothing miraculous? What about the resurrection of the dead? So he says here, no, what I meant was the Messiah won't do anything miraculous or have to do anything miraculous. But God, of course, could. That seems like a very weak answer. That really seems like apologetic. I mean, he did say it. We can look back at it. So, the jury's out. Does the Rambam believe in the resurrection of the dead or not? Is he just trying to, parry the flack, which I think it probably is? And we're so used to saying, if you don't believe in all the Rambam's beliefs, you're a heretic. It seems anathema not to believe in the resurrection of the dead, but I don't know. Is that really so important? No, sure it is. My own mind. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do well. Have a good day.